Hi, everybody. I'm Jeff Maris from WisPolitics.com, and we're going to be talking today with the author of this new book, A History of the University of Wisconsin System. I have with us the author, Pat Brady, and Pat was a legal counsel for the UW system, I will say, during its heyday, and we can talk about that in a bit. First of all, congrats, Pat. This really fills a hole, I think, in the history literature of Wisconsin and Wisconsin government. So, congratulations on doing this book. It's published by the UW Press.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeff, and thanks for having me. I look forward to talking more about the book. As you say, it has been a project for me for a number of years, and I feel very fortunate to have completed it with the support of the system administration and the UW Press.
Yeah, so here's the book again, A History of the University of Wisconsin System, and Pat Brady is here. So Pat, why did you take this on? It's not like you're a busy person. Why'd you take this on?
Well, I had felt for a long time that there was a gap in the history of the university system that needed to be filled. There is a 4-volume, very extensive history of the University of Wisconsin, which begins in 1848 and ends in 1971. And that deals mainly with the Madison campus and then the campuses that it added during the 50s and 60s. And there are subsequent books about Madison, the Madison campus, and many of the other UW institutions have their own history books, but nothing had been done about the system as a whole organization. So I felt that that story needed to be told.
Yes, and it really is the retelling of the story. I've heard bits and pieces of it from reporters and officials who were there at the time, but it does wrap it all together. It's helpful to me. I wasn't in the state at the time. So Pat Lucey, a new governor, a real estate man, former chair of the Democratic Party, and he gets elected governor, and within a year or so, he gets this done. In retrospect, did he get it right?
I think in general he did. He addressed a number of key problems that he had observed over time. So although he was a new governor, he had a lot of familiarity with state politics and the history of the university system. And he had seen the University of Wisconsin, the Madison system, and then the Wisconsin State University systems as they had developed and grown through the 50s and 60s. So he was pretty familiar with a lot of the background. So when he became governor, he had been concerned about a number of things. I think, like a lot of politicians, about the duplication, the competition between these two systems, the inability to coordinate programming. And then there was the added mix of the political climate at the time, which was one of great unrest over the Vietnam War, civil rights, and other social issues. So he felt that bringing the systems together and combining the leadership would not only deal with some of the practical and political issues related to cost and expense and competition, but would also offer the public some reassurance that there was a good control over everything, so that eventually campus unrest would be brought under control. So I think that in putting the two systems together, he actually did do probably the right thing for the time. And it proved to be quite effective as the system matured. The biggest difficulty, I guess, would be that Madison, as the flagship and a major research institution, was not the greatest fit with all the much smaller campuses around the state. And so there were some difficulties in developing a system that could contain all of these rather different institutions. But in general, I think it proved over time to work rather effectively.
Yeah, and I learned something there. I did a future governor, and at the time a UW Stevens Point chancellor, a guy named Sherman Dreyfus of the Red Vest of fame, was a supporter of this because of I think what you alluded to there, the disparity between the WSU schools and the UW-Madison schools.
Yes, I mean, Dreyfus he had started at Madison as a professor at Madison, but he ended up as the chancellor at Stevens Point, and he had become quite convinced that that the smaller schools were not getting their due in terms of resources, and then he believed very firmly that they were offering excellent teaching. So he really wanted the merger to sort of bring everybody together and gain a better sort of brand recognition in a way for the WSU schools.
So, I mean, you wrote the history, you lived a lot of the history. What was the golden age? When was the golden age for the UW system? I don't want to all say that it's past tense. Maybe there is a future one, but I mean, in your mind, what's been the golden age for the system?
Well, I think there were some initial clashes in getting everybody together as a system. But beginning sort of with the Buzz Shaw era in the late 80s, and then continuing through Catherine Lyle in the 90s, there were sufficient funds, and there was a sort of understanding that the state funding would be rather steady, and shortages in state funding would be offset by modest tuition increases. So with that kind of stability, the system had a fairly good run until the 2000s. And then there were larger economic problems that started to create difficulty for the system. So I guess a golden age so far, and we hope that there will be another one, would have been probably in the 90s, late 80s to late 90s, early 2000s.
Okay, we're talking with Pat Brady, author of A History of the University of Wisconsin System, published by the UW Press. So moving on to this, so you give kudos in the book to Tommy Thompson, who presided over this golden age, and there was a lot of state money sloshing through the state coffers at that time. And then you give kudos to Jim Doyle, who followed Scott McCallum into office. You don't give any kudos to Scott Walker. So why is that?
Well, the Walker era proved to be much more difficult for the system. Coming off the Great Recession, there was not a lot of money. There was a deepening political divide, I would say, that made partisanship more potent during that time. And there was a greater development of this sort of anti-intellectual, anti-elitism that led to, some changes that almost became attacks on the system. So, further attacks on the system's budget, on the resources available, that made it much more difficult for the system to function and succeed during that era. So there was sort of a lack of what I feel previously had existed for a long time, which was a genuine affection for the university on the part of state leaders, many of whom had close connections with the university or one of its campuses previously, whose regents were very proud to be regents and wanted to support the system. And as resources shrank and the political divide deepened, I think it became harder to find that sort of commitment to supporting the system and its institutions.
And as you often point out, there is no appetite for increasing tax revenues during the 2000s.
That is correct.
Or today. So we can't talk, we have to talk about the elephant in the room, I think. So Ray Cross is the current UW system president. He's departing. Last year, he was implementing a merger of some of the campuses because of reduced enrollment and financial troubles with a lot of the smaller schools. And now here comes coronavirus and another huge economic hit to the system. You talk about the resiliency of the system. And I'm wondering whether you think this is it's still unfolding, but is this the biggest crisis yet? What's your view of how the long-term impact of this?
Well, it's certainly a major crisis. The system has, and its institutions, I should say, have been through other major crises. If you look at the long, long history, World War, the flu epidemic of 1918, the Great Depression. So there have been other major crises. And even at the beginning of the system, there was an immediate crisis and pressure to shrink the system back then. So I think that you have to sort of take the long view that the system is still resilient. It will still have resiliency. But I think now, more than ever, it's important to act as a system and to get the kind of cohesion and support that comes from what some people have called systemness, but that there is an idea that the system can work together to look at the long view of what the state's higher ed needs are going to be and to start, preparing for that. But this is definitely a massive crisis, as it is for the whole country.
Right. It doesn't seem like there's a search on for Ray Cross's replacement. It doesn't seem like a great time to do a transition, or as many people have said to me, who would want this job?
Well, I mean, I'm not privy to any of the internal workings of this search process, but I think, like many other people, I think as a practical matter, it's a hard time to be out recruiting for somebody to take on a job like this that is obviously going to be, you're jumping right into a crisis from day one. And I think that makes it difficult.
Okay, well, Pat, again, congratulations on the book, History of the University of Wisconsin System, by Pat Brady, who is the former chief legal officer for the system, and it's published by UW Press. Pat, again, congratulations, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay, thank you, Jeff.